Welcome, the Dweller of the Dark. We are a channel honoring the yellowed and blackened bones of many prominent authors. We will be digging up several obscure, strange, and forgotten authors who influenced many of the great horror, science fiction, and fantasy writers today. Comment below if you like. If you have authors that you'd like to see recognized, list them in the comments or contact our author page. Subscribe for more tales of the horrifying, obscure, strange, and forgotten. We'll have quite a collection climbing out of the tombs. If you like any of our tales, comment, ring the bell, and crush the like button below. Unknown Horror Masters. The Skull and Bones collection has risen from the grave. More beast to be released soon. Find us on Fiverr to raise 7 kinds of hell. Check out our other stories and our websites. YouTube, BitChute, Rumble, Dweller of the Dark. Official website, dwellerofthedark.com. Kindle Vella, new serialized novels and novelette. Weekly new episodes. Check out links below for Where the Wolf Dwells. The Curious Death of Dionysus Chennault. Our books and ebooks are on Kindle Amazon. Follow, support us on Twitter, Instagram, Patreon, Bandcamp. Dweller of the Dark. Children of Horror. Legion of Ghouls. Tonight, we continue our celebration of Halloween. Each night, we will be presenting tales of the best Halloween horrors ever conjured to terrify, haunt, and delight. A Night in the Pumpkin Patch by Thomas Swafford. First written in October 2015. True rhyme concerns her not with bursting buds, the chirping bird, the lifting of the rose, save ebon blooms that swell in ghastly woods, and that grim, voiceless bird that ever broods, where through black boughs a wind of horror blows. Robert E. Howard, which will scarcely be understood. Salem, Massachusetts, 2015. Dave Smith felt in his very bones the icy chill of a misty Halloween night. His face stung from a sudden gust of a frosted blast. His lungs burned, inhaling the frigid nighttime air. Dave's entire body caught fire, and he shuddered with anticipation for tonight's rekindling with an old flame. As the moon and stars rose on their cosmic zenith, the tall and gangly man walked with purpose on a cobbled street. The night wind flapped his flowing black hair as bat wings. On Dave sojourned, smelling the wisp of charred smoke from bonfires. He smiled nostalgically as he heard the joyous squeals of kids trick-or-treating for candy. Wide-eyed and grinning as a child, Dave took in the spooky light displays of Dracula and Frankenstein. A little further, in the shadowed neighborhood, he spied 12-foot-high skeletons and a howling animatronic wolfman. All the while, in his excursion, he gazed up at a skull-white moon. The ghostly orb was almost full beaming its silvery rays to the darkness of the forest surrounding his town. Dave pushed back his sable locks of hair with his chilled hands and narrowed his eyes to see out in the forested woodlands, his charged imagination conjuring all manner of spook and devil as the moon illuminated the landscape with its cold light. Dry, fallen leaves scurried past his legs, urging him onward toward some predestined journey into his past. Again, this was the dreaded and horrifically exciting end of October, All Hallows Eve, Samhain, or Halloween all meant the same. Oh, how that wondrous Halloween moon cast such a wicked glance from its nyctaloptic eye. Dave could not help but be entranced by the moon's wicked stare on the revelry and debauchery that so embellished his town. All sorts of activities were for its enjoyment. Apple bobbing in cast iron pails by the children, the spiced rum toast by their parents, and of course, the bonfires where the best ghost stories were shared. But Dave did not haunt these cobbled streets alone. His dear friend Felicia hovered closely near him. Both weaved and rounded the throng of Halloween revelers and costumed children together. Both headed to an old place they had enjoyed as kids. They scrambled to the outskirts of the forest, crunching the dead leaves in their path. Finally, they made it to their destination. It was a deathly silent, vacant field of withered grasses and vines. The field was a quiet, isolated pumpkin patch, brilliantly lit by silver moonlight. Dave peered on in the ghostly radiance of silver light shrouding the field. How long has it been since I've been here? When was the last time I was here with Felicia? Oh yeah, it had to be the Great Pumpkin trick 10 years ago. My cousins Matt and Mark had tricked us. God, I still hate him for that. I'd kill that bastard if I could, but I had better not. I wouldn't want to become a prison hooker, so I won't. Besides, Felicia wouldn't have anything to do with me if my butthole got wrecked. Matt had said years ago, Dave, you saw the Great Pumpkin? You remember the story from the Charlie Brown cartoon? I swear to you, Dave, it's a real thing. If I'm lying, I'm dying. Lifting a brow in skepticism, Dave replied while grinning, Yeah, just like you told me, my junk would drop off if I use women's soap. Maddie, I trust you about as far as I can throw your retarded fat ass. Unfazed, Maddie hooked him in with the tried and true. Fine. You'll never know, Dave. You'll go through life always wondering if I really saw the Great Pumpkin and when your junk don't work from not seeing it. I'll laugh at you in the old folks' home. But don't take my word for it. Go ask Simon Pertwee at the old geezer's lodge. I will, you schmuck, Dave had fired back. If he tells me anything else, I'm going to slug you real good. And if he doesn't, cousin? Matty gave Dave a Cheshire's cat smile, then rattled his fingers on a table as the two ate Oreo cookies. Dave took a sip of his milk and ate a cookie. With the chewed cookie in his mouth, he mumbled, If he tells me and my friend Felicia that he saw the Great Pumpkin in Delot's pumpkin patch, then we'll both go. Why do you always hang out with that crazy, spooky chick? Matty inquired while he too gulped his milk. I really don't know. Felicia has never struck me as spooky. Or maybe I'm just as screwed up, Dave answered as he finished his last Oreo. Half crazed, Simon Pertwee had confirmed the Great Pumpkin. Of course, Matty had made sure of it. He sweetened the man's memory and story with a bribe of Winston cigarettes. Dave and Felicia wouldn't find out the latter until 2 years later. And after a severely scarred and screwed up childhood from that night. While the other children were off collecting chocolate bats and jelly worms in their trick-or-treating, Dave and Felicia sat freezing in the pumpkin patch. The moon rose. The fog rolled in, chilling and blanketing the pumpkin patch. And Dave and Felicia continued to sit and shiver, waiting on the great pumpkin, the god of the pumpkin patch and Halloween, sadly never arrived. Dave and Felicia by midnight figured they had been duped. Dave, we have a better shot of seeing a bulldog in a World War I pilot's outfit than the great pumpkin, Felicia, chattering her teeth, said angrily. She was dressed in a black cat costume that to Dave appeared to have all the warmth of a snowball. Somehow, Maddie once again tricked me. I'm sorry. Dave had apologized. He too was freezing in his druid cloak, though not nearly as bad as Felicia. You will always be cursed with being a sucker, Dave. But at least you'll be my sucker. Felicia gave Dave a warm smile. It was the only warmth she had in the freezing, fog-filled night. This should help with the wind and cold. He gave his cloak to her. Felicia, wrapped in the red cloak, said what was on both their minds. Dave, I think it's... You two dummies really fell for it. Maddie's voice roared with laughter. The guys with him bellowed as well. How in the hell are we related, Dave? Cousin, you are hands down a full retard. Raging tears of embarrassment fell from Dave's face. When I tell Uncle Vito what y'all did, you won't be able to sit for a week. You know your daddy is my godfather. Boys are so stupid, Felicia screeched her anger while tears gushed down her face. My mom is really going to go after y'all too. No more free pizza at Gino's for sure. The cousins, Maddie and Mark, roared louder, falling on the ground in howls under the moon. But it wasn't so funny when Maddie and the boys got home. Between the screams and beatings, Dave was right for sure on that point. Uncle Vito made sure Maddie and Mark would not be able to sit for a week. It was less than a year later when Dave's family moved away from the town. It was a short departure for Dave, however. Whether it was destiny or just good luck, Dave's dad, Ernest, got caught up in a torrid romance. Unfortunately for Agnes, Dave's mother, it was with the office bimbo. Thus, to Dave's great relief, he and his mother moved back to home, sweet home. And Ernest, not long after, got his go-to-hell papers from his once beloved wife, Agnes. They came in the form of a divorce. The last time he had seen Felicia, they'd both been children, enamored with the magic and wonder of the world. They had a profound appreciation of the spooky and the wicked of Halloween. Now, on the cusp and confusion of adulthood, they had both changed. Dave, after over 10 years, had grown tall as his father. He kept the youth of his face, but he gained the musculature of a man of the sea. His blue eyes hadn't changed, but the years of life behind them had. He had lived and learned the mistakes of adolescence. He'd picked up playing the guitar and the piano and had garnered a little money on side hustles performing. Church events and schools paid okay. Private events at home paid a little more. Felicia had also changed in Dave's eyes. She had went from a boxed kid's frame to the shapely curves and pouty lips of a red-haired vixen. But it was her eyes that had caught some fire in Dave now. He couldn't quite explain what was going on in those emerald green cat eyes of hers. To Dave now, they held more secrets than he'd remembered. What was bothering Dave about his childhood friend's demeanor now? Felicia was more withdrawn. A dark cloud seemed to hover over her as she spoke, or even when she made attempts to laugh. The sea of adulthood had rushed in as a pounding ocean wave, and Dave had stood firm in the surge of that wave's pull. But he wasn't so sure about Felicia. The magic and mystery of Halloween had swirled away as the ghosts of the past often do. The wonder and dark sorceries that had eclipsed their childhood had also vanished as ethereal mist in a long-forgotten land. Candy grabs, apple bobs, and bonfires no longer quickened their pulses or kicked up the fires of nostalgia. Adulthood had brought about a shift in priorities. Candy and apples had been replaced by the temptations and enticements of passion and flesh. There were such mysteries beyond all mysteries to ignite the dimensions of pleasure greater than any fire burning hot on a cold night. Dave seemed to feel those flames every time his eyes held on Felicia's shapely legs and full breast. But as she felt the same depth of desire, Dave seemed to think something was burning between them. Hadn't Felicia held her eyes on his a little longer than usual? Wasn't it just 2 days ago Dave watched her in his car's rear mirror, checking out his backside? A backside she pointed with a girlfriend, then giggled wickedly. Then there had been their direct interactions. She seemed flushed every time they talked of old times as kids. Discussing the pumpkin patch incident in passing had brought an even more curious response. That had caused Felicia's lips to perspire and her eyes to widen toward him lustfully. Yes, as of late, she had become unbridled, fidgeting, and friendlier to Dave than he had ever known her to be. And as his heart beat thunderously with each of their exchanges, his own lips perspired, and he felt his skin flush. Dave welcomed Felicia's newfound interest in him. As October 31st approached, Felicia had brought up their disappointing night years before. They were eating pizza outside her family's restaurant when she leaned in. "Dave, it was such a disappointment being tricked like that by Maddie and Mark. I really wished with all my heart to see the great pumpkin." Raising his brow curiously, Dave scratched his chin, thinking, "We were stupid kids, Felicia. That stuff doesn't exist. I was a sucker. Your words, if you recall." "Yes, it was all stupid. Maybe we can make up for such a boring night, Dave." Felicia put down her slice of pepperoni pizza. She clapped her hands together and gave him a mischievous smile. Dumbfounded by what Felicia was hinting at, Dave turned his head to the side and narrowed his eyes. "What are you getting at, Felicia? If you are thinking what I think you are thinking, going back into that freezing pumpkin patch to wait for the great pumpkin, I'm going to think a pumpkin dropped on your skull, or the bats got loose in the belfry, or I'm crazier than a bag of kittens." They both laughed as she interrupted. "Yeah, or that too," they finished, undaunted. "I'm not going there for a fairy tale, Dave." She took his hands into hers and smiled another devilish smile. "We'll go down to the pumpkin patch on Halloween. Only this time, sir, I'll show you the real great pumpkin." Felicia let go of Dave's once again sweaty hands. Dave was happy to get them back. Something in the way she said "great pumpkin" enthralled and terrified him. Dave watched Felicia discard their pizza boxes. Like I said, Dave. She smiled, bending over to drop the pizza boxes in the receptacle. The real great pumpkin awaits. Felicia was using all the charms of a seasoned seductress, and Dave knew it. When she had bent over, he gulped a mouthful of ice in his Coca-Cola to cool down. He took a second gulp of ice when he caught a view of Felicia's bulging cleavage. Just witnessing several of her shirt's buttons undone had kicked off that storm of longing. Then the final revelation sent the poor boy into a lather. That was when Dave saw curves and the jiggle of Felicia's shirt. Then, and only then, he realized Felicia's lewd behavior. Felicia wasn't wearing a bra. As Felicia sat down next to Dave, he leaned in and whispered in her ear, "Oh, Felicia, you tempt me so." "That I do, old friend." Then Felicia turned, showing just the briefest glance of her open shirt. He caught a glimpse. Dave felt his loins grow hot with a fire. It was an inferno Dave was sure only Felicia could put out. He watched her look down at his waist, giving him another of her seductive grins. Felicia brought her green eyes back up into his eyes. She leaned in, grabbing near his crotch and massaging it briefly, all the while saying in his ear, "Dave, in the pumpkin patch, you'll receive so much more." Releasing him and moving back to her original chair, Felicia asked innocently, "What are you doing for Halloween?" Grasping at what had just occurred between them, Dave, almost stuttering, said, I got nothing planned. What about you?" "Oh?" Felicia looked into his eyes with her predatory green eyes and paused. It was a full minute before she continued, bemused. "I thought we might get together. I'm not in the mood to hang out with a crowd. There's always someone who's loud and obnoxious, showing out for others. Plus, the police are always watching the groups to make sure they're not getting into trouble. Parties are boring. Let's just find a place for the two of us to hang out. Sounds good to you?" "Hell yeah!" Dave exclaimed, gulping down the rest of his drink. He watched Felicia get the widest and wickedest of grins. While chewing on his Coke's ice and still trying to cool off his loins, Dave thought, "After what Felicia just did to me, grabbing my crank, if we are alone, who knows what might happen?" Running her hands through the swirls of her red hair, Felicia nonchalantly gave Dave directions where to rendezvous. "Meet me over at the old Adams house at 8 p.m. She stared on him a minute or more. Dave couldn't be sure. Felicia stood over Dave as he still sat. Then, seductively, she leaned in again toward the young man, reigniting the fires of lust in him. "Don't tell anyone, though. The last thing we need is someone tagging along. Three's a crowd, Dave. Got it?" "I definitely got it, Felicia." Nervously, he answered. Then he watched as Felicia walked into her parents' store. Before closing the door, Felicia turned one more time and stared at Dave. She brought a single finger up to her lips and did a shh sound, then went inside. It was Halloween, and Dave prepared for his big night with Felicia in the pumpkin patch. It started with a hot, steaming shower. He made sure to use every scented soap that he had. After the shower, he put on his best deodorant, Old Spice, and his best cologne, Cavinci, and dressed in his cleanest drawers. The whole while putting on his white Fruit of the Looms, he remembered his mother's warning on clean underwear.
Dave, you never want to get in an accident, go to the doctor, or be involved in a disaster and have dirty drawers. Always wear the brightest tighty-whities, young man.
Fully dressed, he knew Agnes would ask where he was going. Naturally, the answer would be a Halloween party at the office or at the local fraternity. Anything else would draw her wrath. Combing his hair and brushing his teeth for the third time, Dave recalled, Mom won't care if I hook up with a hot girl at an office party. Hell, she won't care if I score the college chick at the fraternity party. But the insane local girl in the pumpkin patch might drive her into a lather. She'd rather I'd do the horizontal mambo and no-clothes polka with a coven of witches on All Hallows Eve before Felicia O'Brien of the Geno's Pizza Dynasty. Hadn't Dave just heard several of Agnes's chastity warnings to neighbors just this week? What number of life lessons was Mom on anyway? David even caught way too much of one of Agnes's exchanges with Beatrice, her best friend.
Keep an eye on her. You don't want to be a grandmother anytime soon.
Dave went to grab the car keys. His plan would be to park near the university, then scramble 4 blocks over to the forest and the Adams house. There he'd wait for Felicia to show up. He knew Felicia, true to her usual form, would be late. Hell, Felicia would probably be late for her own funeral. Anyway, after grabbing the keys, he'd try to dart out before Agnes could inquire. But there was Mom, with her car keys in hand, at the front door.
I imagine my precious man is going to celebrate Halloween. I ask only, where are you going? And please promise me you won't do anything stupid, Dave.
I'll be back later, Mom. I'm going over to a Halloween party at Omega Sigma Epsilon. Dave saw he'd forgotten the most important part of their conversation. Mom, I absolutely promise I won't do anything stupid.
I just worry about you, Dave. I know the divorce was tough on you, and coming back here wasn't the best idea, but it's the only place for us.
Agnes went up and looked Dave up and down, and gave her son a hug.
Be careful and don't get into trouble.
I will, Mom. Dave grabbed the keys to head out.
Dave, what's that god-awful smell under your arms? I'd swear that was Old Spice.
Agnes held her nose and coughed at the same time. Dave just shook his head. The Adams house had once been the pride of the neighborhood. Built of the finest granite, it had survived winter after harsh winter, only to succumb to a mysterious fire several years ago. Now the remains, shrouded in overgrowth and fog, stood like the ruins of a castle. Certainly, as the wind howled through the trees surrounding the estate, one could imagine memories of a bygone time. The charred bones, the rafters, beams, and walls of the house weren't too spooky by day, especially when light sent a rainbow shard through the broken windows. But as the shadows grew long across the hearth and surrounding shrubbery, the ruins grew eerie. As night arrived, the house became more lurid and sinister, with all manner of conjured phantasm. A legend had grown over the years about Adam's house. A black specter hovered and haunted the ruins. Sometimes The shape held the face of a recognizable loved one. Sometimes the cloaked harbinger would have the head of a grinning skull. All who had seen the phantom disagreed on the actual appearance of it. In the end, they figured it was just a hoax, a silly prank to keep wandering kids or overly curious adults from playing there. The leaves crunched under his feet as he walked, bathed in the moonlight. Dave remembered some ballad from Edgar Allan Poe. As he crawled through the growing piles of leaves, Poe's haunting Ulalume echoed in his ears. The skies, they were ashen and sober. The leaves, they were crisped and sere. The leaves, they were withering and sere. It was night in the lonesome October of my most immemorial year. It was hard by the dim lake of Auber in the misty mid-region of Weir. It was down by the dank tarn of Auber in the ghoul-haunted woodland of Weir. Adam's house surely could be a ghoul-haunted woodland with its fog-covered piles of leaves and ancient overgrowth of oak. As he waded through the piles of red and orange oak leaves, Dave was thankful the temperatures had plummeted to near freezing. The cold might keep the spiders and snakes away for now. Definitely, the night would end badly with a bite from either. Kicking back the last of the leaves stuck to his shoe, Dave staggered on through twisting briars and climbed over a fallen tree on the right side of the crumbling house. Wandering further, he traced his way, ducking more vines and bramble. At the end of the right corner, with a good view of the trail he just walked on, Dave waited for Felicia. From this secluded vantage point, he could see her or anyone passing by. Dave, while peering, didn't want to be discovered by a passing cop car. Cops for sure would tell him he couldn't be hanging around, loitering and trespassing were crimes after all. They threatened to arrest him if he didn't leave. And the absolute worst for Dave, if they caught him, the cops might take him into custody and call his mother. He stood in the recessed darkness of the house. Dave shivered in the shadows, waiting and watching the forest line in the unlit street for any signs of Felicia. How the shadows made all sorts of ghastly forms. On he looked, straining his eyes with the shine of the crescent moon. He got a feeling of unease as a dark form shifted between the shadows of the trees. The form moved toward him, cloaked in the shimmer of moonlight and shadow. It glided between the ruins of Adam's house and the forest. Finally, the form hovered right in front of Dave, blocking his view of the street. Appalled by this sudden phantom's appearance, recalling the legend of the Black Spectre, Dave's dread grew to panic. The shadow before him, from what the moonlight illuminated, held no discernible features. It was just an opaque mass that writhed and twisted, but never revealed its true form. Unnerved, Dave's panic now was palpable. With his mouth dry, feeling like coarse grit sandpaper, Dave prepared to scream.
Trick or treat.
A familiar voice called out from the shadowed, hovering mass of darkness, then laughed heartily. Two porcelain white hands darted suddenly out of the darkness of the mass, illumined by moonlight and something else. The hands reached up and pulled back a hood, his old druid's hood that he had given Felicia so long ago. And with the hood raised back, Dave saw Felicia grinning at him mischievously. Felicia threw off the old robe and tossed it to Dave. She had on another costume. It was a more refined and elaborate robe. This one was longer, black sequined, and shroud-like in costume design. Running her hands through the red curls of her hair, she asked,
Did I scare you?
Dave figured by her incessant giggling that Felicia realized she had. I didn't know what you were. It's practically pitch black out here, Felicia. Dave admitted reluctantly. He let out a sigh of relief. And as she moved in closer, he studied her more carefully.
You like my new robe? Yours I used for a couple of years.
But, as you can see, Dave, it's worn out. Felicia fluttered her sequined black robe around in the darkness. For a brief second, Dave imagined they were sparkly vampire wings as the moon cast the sequins alight.
My mom helped me make it for Halloween.
It's really something, I'll give you that. You could be Vampira with that get-up. Hell, I thought for a second you might be the Black Spectre. Dave shook more leaves off himself. He cracked his neck and moved in place to get the blood flowing. It was getting colder as he had stood waiting for Felicia. That's too funny, Dave. You thought I was a boogeyman? She cackled and then continued. Actually, I wanted this cloak to hide myself in the dark. Its sole purpose is to conceal me so I can get around at night. As you witnessed, I can blend in with the shadows so well with this. Yes, I'd say it's one of the best I've seen for concealment, Dave replied, ready to get a move on, far away from the abysmal Adams house. Dave was shivering from the cold. Felicia studied him a moment. Are you ready to roll? Dave nodded as she ushered them toward the pumpkin patch. Dave watched his friend as she wandered through more brush to the field. She gracefully turned as a courtesan, allowing the cloak to lift slightly in a pirouette. Smiling wickedly in jest, with her flashlight under her chin, Felicia would stomp heavily as an ogre. Dave would giggle at the over-the-top movements and the crunching and crackling noises he thought would wake the dead. He heard the wind screech chillingly through the trees, casting down all manner of leaf. As the screech continued, Dave saw orange and burnished copper oak leaves hover, and yellow walnut leaves whirl as wraiths falling to the ground. Onward they trudged together in the silvery moonlight. Dave continued to peer, guessing what types of agriculture equipment had been left out in the darkness of a nearby field. Some he guessed were tractors that stood as lone sentinels guarding the edge of long cultivated roads. Trailers housing dried stalks of something, maybe corn or maybe wheat, as the two paused to rest before carrying on. There were curiosities of this part of the town. This area had always remained undeveloped and untouched, despite offers and petitions to put the land to use. None had ever finalized. And for Dave, as he walked in this paradise of towering stands of shrubs and long sheets of yellowed grasses, it should remain that way. It was a clear, chilled October night sky as Dave and Felicia continued their walk to the quiet pumpkin patch of their youth. As they journeyed in the darkness, Dave watched in awe as the moon had drifted from the horizon to mid-sky. The ghoulish white orb radiated silver moonlight across the woodlands and fields. The stars sparkled as crystalline tears across the sway of cosmos above them. With an almost full moon, Dave could see his frosted breath with each of his tired expirations. As a single cloud passed the moon, further illuminating all, Dave and Felicia easily saw the path for their journey and crossed it as wraiths in ghostly night. Suddenly, Felicia stopped by a twisted bush of sage. Curiously, Dave watched as she leaned into the shrubs, pulling something out from behind it. He squinted and flashed his own light to see what the object was. From his vantage point, he glimpsed the shine of reflective glass. But as Felicia secured it, he saw the object also had the fluidity of a black ichor. It was a large, black plastic garbage bag. Felicia smiled and pushed it toward Dave for review. Dave studied the black bag carefully, looking over the contents inside.
I have a wool blanket inside the bag. The ground is already cold and damp with frost. I didn't want us to catch a chill sitting on the ground.
So, you're planning on sitting a spell, huh? Dave wondered why she'd go through all the trouble and risk putting a garbage bag out here, not knowing he'd come out here. Had she done something like this before? And if she had, why not be out here with that guy? Why was it so important to pre-plan putting a blanket out here this far in a pumpkin patch? Rubbing his temples while walking, Dave went over all the questions bothering him. Finally, he had an epiphany of what would be transpiring between them. She brought a blanket out here for us. That had to be right after I agreed. Things are definitely going to be spicy tonight. In the middle of the pumpkin patch, the grass and vines had been cleared. Dave again thought of the planning to clear out such a large swath of area. Again, Dave smiled at all of Felicia's planning for their big night. The couple stopped in the very center of the cleared circle.
Well, it's time to put away childish things, Dave. We are adults of the world now.
Felicia unfastened the ruby brooch holding her cloak around her. The shrouded black costume fell to the cold earth. Wow, that's some trick, Felicia, Dave gasped aloud. He had an intuitive feeling one of the reasons Felicia wore the cloak was to conceal more than herself in the dark. Otherwise, Felicia's mother would never have let her out of the house dressed in her current garb. Felicia wore the clothes befitting what Agnes would have determined were a harlot or whore's attire. For starters, and to no complaint from Dave, her jeans were tight and low. Dave was certain by the tightness of the jeans that Felicia had forgotten her panties. Above Felicia's taut waist, she wore a thin pink shirt. The tight shirt was cut off right above the rib cage. The tightness revealed further carnal mysteries to Dave. It was quite apparent to the lustful man that Felicia wore no bra. Dave felt those roaring fires of desire alight again, but this time he spoke aloud what he was feeling for Alicia in the moonlight. Quoting Poe, Dave hoped to sweep Felicia off her feet. That holy dream, while the world were chiding, have cheered me as a lovely beam, a lonely spirit guiding. Felicia fell on the ground in a fit of maniacal laughter.
Dave, are you huffing paint? If that was supposed to turn me on, it was a failure. Dear sir, Edgar Allan Poe on Halloween. Of all the poems to quote from him to kick things off between us, you chose a dream?
They moved from the cleared circle in the pumpkin patch. Crunching the iced ground, they made their way to the left edge of the field. Noticing the buildup of frost and ice on his shoes, Dave stomped them clean. Then he looked around at this part of the field. It looked familiar to him. Isn't this close to where we were that night? Dave asked, remembering the joke the others played on them years before.
Oh yes, she responded. But this time, you will get to see the great pumpkin.
Dave was warmed with anticipation. While he preferred they had snuggled together in the cleaner circle of the field, Dave wouldn't object to them bedding down anywhere. Even the Adams house was fine with him at this point. as he thought of the pale skin of Felicia and those curves and hidden mysteries she had kept hidden under her clothes. Dave's pulse quickened, his eyes widened, and his loins once more were afire. Hardly controlling the anticipation, he licked his chapped lips. I can't wait to see Felicia fully naked, but all this trekking out to the pumpkin patch is weird. And what's with this great pumpkin gibberish? Is she trying to kill my boner? There he is! Ecstatically, Felicia pointed to an adjacent field. There was another cleared circle. She pointed to a shadowy figure on a post in the middle of the field. Approaching the long shadow of the monstrous thing, Dave saw a large post dangling a scarecrow. But there was something different about the scarecrow. On its head, instead of a rag face stuffed with straw, it held the largest pumpkin Dave had ever seen carved, with the most sinister grin. The figure loomed at least 6 feet above them on a wooden cross looking down. The great pumpkin, for surely this had to be, wore tattered overalls nested with stalks of corn and hay. The arms and legs tied on the cross were also the same. The great pumpkin, from its feet to, well, pumpkin head, was at least 10 feet tall. The arms outstretched were 8 feet across from ragged gloved hand to hand. A lot of work went into this. Dave's eyes widened in awe as he walked all the way around the scarecrow. Often, wobbly and withered scarecrows looked funny, but this monstrous one, with its leering mouth and devilish eyes, appeared especially ominous. The face cut into it wasn't jolly, but very disturbing. Inside the pumpkin head, there seemed to be a black candle, flickering red and orange light in a hurricane glass. As Felicia and Dave moved beneath the scarecrow, red and orange light bathed them in hellish luminescence. Felicia seemed to smile wickedly under the spell of the scarecrow's light. A red aura seemed to cast a crimson shade across Dave's face. Shuddering, Dave felt as if the great pumpkin was grinning down to him with the cruelest of intentions. The way the harbinger's form had been shaped, lifelike and foreboding, made Dave feel as if the figure might leap down and rip him apart any minute. As his dread grew ever unnerving, Dave could almost see it detaching itself from the post and reaching down to rip him to shreds. Felicia began laying out the blanket in front of the scarecrow. She pulled the corners taut across the ice ground and stamped down each end. You do realize you put the blanket down in front of him? Dave pointed up to the scarecrow. The moonlight was already bringing the menace to its gaunt frame. Felicia put their flashlight under her chin. She made a voice similar to the 1930s Dracula, Bela Lugosi, then smiled wickedly. You're not scared, are you? Ha ha ha. Okay, maybe her voice wasn't Bela Lugosi. Actually, now that he thought about it, her voice was more like Count Chocula from the cereal commercials, or the Count from Sesame Street. He wasn't scared exactly with her over-the-top voices and the scarecrow, but the gentle night wind was causing the scarecrow to rattle and heave. The sounds out here in the quiet of the field were unsettling. There was a strangeness to this situation. Had it not been for Felicia's dogged insistence, Dave would have left. As if she was picking up on his unease, Felicia said, I got something that will help you relax. Reaching into her denim purse, she pulled out something. By the flash of the sparking in her hands and the strong odor of pineapple kush, Dave realized that Felicia had brought a fat joint and a lighter. Cool, said Dave. He loved the oregano-smelling grass and the mind-numbing that came with each inhale. His eyes, as he looked up, zoomed in and out to the moon and the stars, as smoke rings drifted around the couple. Dave hoped Felicia was as relaxed like this as well. As suave as he was trying to act, the truth was he was still quite the virgin. Dave Smith had hardly kissed a girl, much less gone to home plate. But here was his moment to run Felicia's bases. But already there was concern for the fledgling sportster. His brain and libido were half-baked right now, heading to fully cooked. It would be a genuine horror to go floppy in the heat of the moment. If his whistle stick took a swan dive and he was unable to perform, what terrifying shames awaited? Especially once Felicia spilled the beans on their flaccid affair. But then there was the other tragic flip side of the tryst. Condom be damned that Dave wanted a family right now. His love muscle would get the cover of covers. With the joystick wrapped tighter than a mummy, Dave and Felicia would make a memory, not a family. They sat on the blanket high, moving in time with the drifting fog and night. Dave was enjoying the bathed silver splendor of the field. In the moon's beams, he saw Felicia obviously felt the same. He watched as Felicia studied the intricate details of the scarecrow in reverent awe. She swayed, seemingly mesmerized by the sight of the creepy figure. It looked almost like some strange version of the crucifixion, which added to the weirdness. Throwing caution aside, Dave leaned into Felicia, running his nails up and down her back, under her shirt, in an attempt to arouse her. But his touch went beyond that. Dave, concerned by Felicia's increased, mesmerized stare at the scarecrow, wanted to show that he was there. Maybe his daring act would be well received. Maybe she'd shrug him off and tell him to stop. Either, though, would break Felicia's unearthly gaze at the scarecrow. Undaunted and unfazed by Dave's advances, she gave her answer as if in a distant dream.
He has had many names through the ages. The Norse called them the Veneer. To me, he is Priapus, the son of Aphrodite and Dionysus.
Confused and sighing, Dave didn't know exactly how to respond. How do I reply to something that wild, man? I've heard the name Aphrodite somewhere before. Where was it? Damn, my head's all fogged right now. This grass is kicking my ass. Maybe it was that god-awful Greek mythology class back in high school. But what's with the other names? I can't even pronounce some of them, and the others I have never heard of before. Felicia, outspreading her arms and falling back on the blanket, cackling maniacally, continued with her soliloquy.
Tonight is Halloween, or as we call it, Samhain. It is when the veil between the worlds is thinnest. It is the time that communication and interaction is easiest with the other side. The spirits are waiting.
Dave surmised between the growing swirl of confusion in his own stoned head. High-octane weed makes people say and do the stupidest of things. Why is she talking about boring as shit theological gods anyway? It's Halloween out here in a freezing pumpkin patch, getting twisted with some most righteous reefer. Felicia and I should be in the full frontal freaky deaky right now, getting our mattress mambo going. This deep spirituality rant of hers is a boner killer for sure. Dave fell back on the blanket and rubbed his temples, confused. He had no idea what Felicia continued to babble about. She had led him on. She had given him false hope of carnal conquest. She had led him to believe they were going to tear away their clothes and rip away the barriers to engage in the wildest fiery sex. Instead, however, they are freezing their butts off in the middle of nowhere in a frost-covered pumpkin patch. And to make things even less romantic, Felicia has been ranting about a creepy-looking skeletal scarecrow. He'd heard of guys getting cock-blocked before, but he'd never heard of one where the great pumpkin was the Bogart. Grimacing, looking at the rolling clouds across the moon,
All Felicia wants to rant about is crazy mythology shit. I'll try something new to kick up the fires between us, even if she slaps me in the process. It'll be better than her Samhain history lesson. Would you like a back rub? Dave whispered in Felicia's ear, hoping to arouse her. With a little luck, he'd get that shirt off her back. Lay down and I'll give you one. It'll be easier if you slip off your shirt. Forwarding the request, Felicia sat up giggling away. She pointed to the edge of the field next to a wooded area. A crowd was advancing through the forest carrying torches. From what Dave saw, they seemed to have on similar black and red garments. Felicia stood, then started jumping around ecstatic.
Here they come!
Dave looked and observed a procession of robed figures with hoods pulled over their heads and lanterns in their hands. The crowd of shrouded figures moved as a coordinated wave in a concentric circle. Eerily, as they lumbered forward through the moonlit fog, they said nothing, but silently walked toward them. A sense of foreboding grew in the pit of Dave's stomach. There was a gnawing in his skull of dread. There was the realization his private adventure with Felicia had taken an unexpected turn. I'm starting to freak out. Who are they? What are they doing here? The last thing I want is anyone else around as I'm trying to get lucky. Especially weirdos in robes party crashing us in a pumpkin patch out in the middle of Halloween night. Is this some elaborate joke Felicia's playing on me? Dave went to stand. As he got up, his head spun rapidly and his eyes went across. Cold sweat ran across his forehead from the delirium. Worst of all, Dave noticed how unsteady he was. The weed Felicia had given him had really fried him. Bait. Dave was trying to judge the distance of the crowd circling him. The figures seemed to hover across the frosted path and were now about 20 feet from him. Each robed figure pulled their black hoods down to shadow their face. Shockingly, Dave was able to catch glimpses of some of the hooded crowd as they donned their hoods. One was the tall and athletic Sid, Felicia's older brother. His calloused boxer hands gave Dave a feeling of apprehension. I hope Sid isn't here to kick my ass for trying to nail his sister. I've seen him fight. I'll get my jaw broken at a minimum. Dave recognized a few of the other people. Some he knew by name, others he had seen around. What shocked him was that some of them were much older and normally infirmed adults. Sid stopped just in front of Dave and Felicia. Dave gulped and prepared to run if he had to. Sid eased his concerns somewhat, but gave him new, puzzling questions to ponder. Is everything good to go, sis? Felicia smiled back at him. Yes, big brother. It's all going well. He's pretty ready for everything. At this point, Dave was fighting the numbing effects of the grass. He grew the ire of his anger and tried to run. He couldn't coordinate his legs to leave. His tongue was dry as cotton. His heart raced, and Dave's fears grew. Something is up here. They have some weird plan for me. Why hadn't Felicia let me in on it? Solemnly, Sid spoke, with his hands outstretched as he nodded and gave orders. Let us begin. Sid moved toward the great pumpkin, his sister, and Dave, as if important business needed to be conducted. Upon Sid's initial nod, the encircled crowd took off their robes. Each revealed their naked flesh. Each carried around their pale necks a large chain of gold with an amulet housing crimson rubies in the shape of the great god Pan. The moon, high on its zenith, cast an ethereal glow across the field and the group. Blasted in brilliant silver light, Dave could make out the details of the forms that surrounded him. Male forms disgusted him in their revelation. There was no tantalizing mystery in their physiques, but the various women shapes transfixed him. Those curves eased his fear and brought back the earlier lustful excitement he'd had with Felicia. Relinquishing his concerns and going to a knee to steady himself. This might not be so bad. I might be center stage for an epic orgy. Naturally, there's a few bumps in the road. One problem I see is to my right. I'll have to figure out how to avoid the hairy-backed gorilla lady. You could weave a rug with her back hairs. Then, to the left of me, I'll have to jiggle away from the flabby, knuckle-dragging waddlers. For certain, in the back of the crowd, I'll need to hop out on the one with a Fu Manchu hair lip and wooden leg. But I might not be too picky there. I could make a small fortune on eBay, selling her antique leg. Dave lifted his spinning head in the direction where Felicia stood. He looked toward her, stunned. His friend since childhood's earliest hour had transformed. Unearthly was her curved frame as it stood in the light of the moon. Candlelight flickered a brilliant yellow glow on her pale ivory skin. Torches tempted Dave with Felicia's mysteries in their roaring red and orange glow. Dave's heart fluttered in the seductive showers of brilliant yellow light across her breast. Her red hair shimmered as deep in color as the Pan amulet around her neck. Silver rays continued to cast moonlight across the bareness of all. To Dave, in the midst of her wondrous revelation, Felicia was now an angelic vision. But then Dave noticed something. An object crashed all his preconceived notions of his situation. For Felicia O'Brien gripped tightly in her right hand as she lowered her head and grinned devilishly, a large curved knife. This had been the bundle she picked up on their way here. This knife of gold and studded gems had been wrapped in a linen and left for Felicia to dutifully pick up. But why all the secrecy? Why have such a priceless relic out here in the middle of a pumpkin patch? For what matter? Why were all these nutcases freezing in their birthday suits surrounding him and the scarecrow? Felicia continued her hideous sneer. Remember back when we came out looking for the great pumpkin all those years ago, Dave? He was supposed to bring candy for all the good girls and boys. Felicia looked up at the great pumpkin. There are entities that bring things to those who follow and venerate him. But they require that their followers make offerings to them as well. One must give to receive. Dave was grimly assessing. Naked people with a knife. Naked, disrobed believers in the great pumpkin were in a field for Halloween. A horrific realization had crashed through finally into his drugged mind. He tried again to stand and dash away. Turning, he tried to run, but stumbled into the iced grass and fell. His legs refused to work properly. Outraged by his body's failure to save him, Dave mumbled groggily, "What did you give me?" Felicia's smile chilled him to the bone. She bent down and brushed a few raven hairs on Dave's face as she spoke. As the knowing grin crossed her face, she admitted, "Some really good pot. Plus, I may have added some Jemison weed, the devil's apple, and a specific selection of hallucinogenic plants, species that have been known to witches for centuries past, down from one generation to the next." He tried to stand and run again, but Dave flopped over on the ground with his back crashing into the frost. Looking up into the sparkling stars, Dave whispered, confused, "Witches? Felicia leaned over Dave, blocking his view of the celestial night. She nodded at him.
Yes, after that night here, I began to read about Halloween and its origins and found my true path. It called me from across the ages. I saw glimpses of my former lives, was able to do things, cast spells, and see the future. I found others like me and was initiated. Then I, in turn, taught others and founded my own coven and taught others who could appreciate the old ways.
Dave's mind was a torrent of confused images and winding thoughts, with his voice trembling and garbled. Why did you need me here? He had just enough awareness to comprehend. He feared the answer. Felicia stood back up, giving Dave his view of the growing fog and cloud-covered moon. He no longer could fight the witch's drugged effects.
We have an important ritual to perform, and we need you for it.
Suddenly, the other druids moved upon him. Dave was paralyzed to do anything with the potion in full effect. He was helpless. They tore the clothes off him till he was as bare as they were.
We call this being skyclad.
Felicia gleefully roared at him, her words sounding as if under the weight of water. Somehow, to Dave, he reflected in a morbid laugh how even now Felicia was boring him literally to death as she gave another Samhain lecture. Dave thought with a hallucinogenic, euphoric laugh. Ha ha! I'd rather be a clueless student rather than be subjected to any more of her torturous rants. Not hearing Dave's mumbling insults, Felicia tortured him some more with her words.
All important rituals need to be performed like this.
He was spread out on his back. People were kneeling on his arms and legs. He opened his mouth to scream, but a girl who looked ageless pushed one of his rolled-up socks into it. His head was pointed at the scarecrow. Dave could push his head back and see it. The scarecrow seemed to look down and approve of the proceedings. Felicia stepped over him, settling down. She straddled his body. Usually feeling her against him like this would have ignited his loins. Grimly, Dave admonished in a dreamy thought. All that heat for this twat goes away when a bitch, and I mean witch, and her coven want to kill you. Felicia stooped, raised the dagger, then paused and looked up to the eternal cosmos. The moon hovered close to a sacrificial zenith.
If I slay you here, Dave,
Felicia maniacally cackled,
your frightful spirit will haunt me forever. Our souls bound in this blood act will never leave each other. You will never leave me again.
Alas, desperate gasp to save his life, Dave inhaled all the cold air he could to clear his head, pleading to any sanity left in Felicia. I didn't want to leave you. My parents made me go. Don't kill me. Felicia ignored his cries of mercy. She lifted her arms to the night sky and held the blade with both her hands. Heated sweat dripped onto Dave's face as she did so. Intensely, her eyes narrowed, gazing up toward the great pumpkin. Felicia pushed her blade and hands to him, begging. The veil is open, great pumpkin. We summon you. And the harvesters of the realms, we implore them to accept this offering of blood and flesh. In turn, we ask you to grant that which we seek. Pulling in the cool air had helped to knock down the witch's brew. Dave took another breath coming out of the hallucinogenic fog. He was able to gain some strength. Dave wrestled with a woman about his mother's age. The woman's claw-like hands gripped and pulled a handful of his hair. Blood poured onto the back of Dave's neck from patches of torn hair from the act. The woman stretched his neck, taut, placing his head in a sniffing position. Felicia looked down at Dave. I wish I could have relented to you. I truly wish I could have taken your virginity as I now take your virginal life. But these rituals do much better if the sacrifice is a virgin. Dave was unable to tell her to go to hell. The witch, Felicia O'Brien, leaned into Dave, rubbing her sweated body, breast, loins, and all, to Dave's recoil. She slyly whispered secretively into his ear.
On the other hand, you do get to see me in the coven disrobed. I'll be happy knowing you had at least one of your dreams come true, for you were bounded to me eternally. You also will hold a position of great esteem as an offering to the old gods.
Dave took in another breath. He was hoping against hope that he would get at least one vengeful reprieve in his final moment. He heard Felicia cackle the most sinister of boasts.
Oh, one other nice thing about doing a ritual skyclad. It makes it easier to wash off the blood afterwards.
Felicia moved from Dave's left ear. She moved her face right over his. The witch let her sparkling green eyes gaze lovingly into his. In the moment, Dave could smell the roses of her perfume. He could feel the heat of her sex writhing on him. Felicia was puckering her lips and leaning further in. The witch meant to give him a farewell kiss. As Felicia's lips made wet contact with Dave's lips, then proceeded to a French kiss, Dave made his move. With what little strength he had left, Dave locked his teeth on Felicia's tongue and bottom lip. With a cobra strike, he bit down, ripping both off with one final bite. Then he gulped down both defiantly. Recoiling back in screaming pain, Felicia was furious. Dave saw she gathered herself for a moment. No one else moved to assist her. She returned to her place back on top of Dave. She smiled a hideous, lecherous smile with her missing lip and ragged tongue. She attempted to finish the ritual, babbling incoherently to Dave's profound joy. Dave looked past her in the moment with his own smile. He saw a shooting star flash across the celestial night in a bright bluish shimmer. He heard the mysterious, distant hoot of an owl. He smelled the fragrant myrrh and frankincense from the charred burning of incense. Then, in acceptance, he took a deep breath and relented in his fight. Felicia smiled wickedly as she realized what Dave's gasping gesture meant. It was evident Dave had given up his final fight. That was the moment Felicia took the golden knife and cut his throat. 3 days later, 2 men wearing orange hunting jackets and carrying 20-gauge shotguns made their way across the field. Pete owned the field. He had with him his friend since first grade, Reed. This area of the field near the pumpkin patch had the most quail. Today of all days, after a hard night's frost, they might bag their limit or more in quail.
Your scarecrow isn't earning his pay,
the taller of the 2 wiry men, Reed, said with a chuckle.
What are you talking about?
Pete, who was of a similar athletic build, asked as he lifted his hunting hat to adjust it. Reed pointed toward a shadowy figure perched on a post over in the field. Pete paused a moment. He furrowed his brow, confused.
I didn't put that up.
Probably a bunch of kids did it for Halloween. I wish they'd keep their asses off my property. Reed nodded, adding, "Did they ever find that kid that went missing after Halloween?" Reshuffling his shotgun on his shoulder, Pete shook his head. "Not that I've heard. Odd the way those crows are gathered on that thing. They may smell food or something dead. Let's go down there and check it out. I want to see what those kids have done." They walked over to the great pumpkin tied to the pole. Pete immediately caught the smell of something dead as they neared. Advancing closer through the withered vines, climbing through a pool of black ichor covered in flies, the two hunters retched in disgust. The crows flew off at their approach. The birds knew what guns were and to avoid humans with them. Reed viewed the scarecrow. "That one's really scary," then hunted around for what may have attracted the crows. "I don't see anything that the crows would have wanted." He realized his friend had gone silent and turned to see what was wrong. Pete's eyes had gone wide and wild with terror as he gazed on the face of the scarecrow. The great pumpkin's head was rotting and sagging to fall. The rot obviously was caused by the thaw of the field. Whatever Pete was seeing underneath the pumpkin made his face go white. To Reed, it looked as if Pete was stalled in either crying or a scream. Reed ran over, dropping his shotgun. There was real terror on Pete's face and in the way his friend shuddered and fell to his knees. "What in blazes is wrong?" A portion of the pumpkin fell off just as he made his way to Pete. Pete screeched in a shrill and pointed to the face of the great pumpkin. As a cool November gust blew up wisps of dead grasses in its wake, Reed turned up, squinting in the blinding rays of morning sun. The great pumpkin's eyes had rotted away. Orange and blackened pieces were falling off the pumpkin perched on the scarecrow's head. Reed, also falling to his knees to vomit, witnessed the horror that would live with him all the rest of his days. It was an image that would haunt him every Halloween thereafter. For perched within the great pumpkin, Reed saw two maggot-encrusted white eyes. To Reed, these eyes were scared, unblinking eyes. They were rotted human eyes, the stare of a corpse, looking back at him. Thank you for listening. Have a great night.